Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Guichaoua, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello everyone, welcome, and indeed welcome back to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. My name is Alex Hochuli, and this podcast is also Philip Cunliffe, hello.
Hi.
And George Hoare, hello.
Hey.
Phil, tell us what we're talking about today.
So today we're going to be talking about the new Scramble for Africa. I mean, I guess, whether there is one, if there is one, what its main drivers and dimensions are. And this in particular is prompted by all the discussion over growing Russian involvement, particularly in Central and Northern Africa, the former French colonial empire in that region, because there's just a constant stream of headlines about the Wagner mercenary group in particular that's been involved in all sorts of military confrontations in that region, how far recent coup d'etat in the region favor Russia over and are kind of gradually eroding the power of France and so on. So it's basically something that's been prompted by headlines, and we're going to try and see how far we can see what might be happening behind all the talk of growing Russian influence, and how far that betokens a new geopolitical struggle in the continent.
Yeah, I mean, George, we're I guess in a new Cold War. That's what people are calling it.
That's what you're calling it. I believe you have a theory here about how this Cold War is not about the internal contradictions of the two societies in the Cold War, but is rather about two different forms of capitalism or something like that.
I mean, it's hardly an original theory. Look, I mean, for starters, calling it a new Cold War, I think is stupid, and actually is probably of a part with a wider problem that we can't. Well, we can't name things anymore, right? Everything is post something, everything is neo or new something, and it's been a very long time since something has emerged which has its original name, which might be kind of unimportant, superficial, just about kind of the naming of it, but I think it speaks to a lack of historical imagination. But anyway,
but a Cold War is like a deadlocked, it's a deadlocked kind of geopolitical standoff that neither side can kind of win outright through a full-on military confrontation. So it's not, like it's describing a particular kind of conflict. I mean, isn't that an accurate way to describe?
Yeah. No, and indeed, I think that in this case, it does seem that we're, plunging headlong into a new geopolitical conflict between two blocs. What's interesting about this new Cold War is that it fits the misleading stereotype about the original Cold War, which is to say that was described as East versus West, as if they are two competing blocs which are basically equivalent to one another in some sense, and that they are locked in competition with one another and fighting proxy wars here and there. What is distinct about the original Cold War is precisely its ideological underpinnings, that it wasn't just a battle between equivalent blocs, but ones which proposed, at least theoretically, different ways to organize their own societies. Not only that, but those societies were riven internally by those same conflicts, by the conflict between the working class and the bourgeoisie, or between socialism and capitalism, and so on. And that was something that was, so it wasn't merely just these homogenous blocks, left and right, not left and right, but east and west, left and right of your map as you're looking at it, that are fighting between each other, but that there are in conflicts which are internal to those societies. What's remarkable about this emerging new Cold War is how they're all fighting on the same terrain. They're different capitalist powers which don't really propose any differing ideologies. At the most, they're sort of ex post facto kind of legitimating ideologies to say we're fighting, the West says we're fighting for liberalism and democracy, or for feminism, or for, minority rights and whatever, whereas Russia will present itself as fighting for, I don't know, traditional norms and values, and China will say, I'm not sure exactly what China's pitch is, but effectively we will have wealth, we'll have stability,
and prosperity, stability, order, kind of sound, sagacious government, as opposed to the instability that comes with populism and democratic upheaval. I think, that would probably be it. But so it's interesting. It's worth teasing out a bit, I think, because of course there is, I think, Vladimir Putin, when he claims to be defending, a European ideal, a world in which God doesn't have different gender pronouns. This was one of the idiotic kind of points he made in a speech recently, in reference to something that was brewing in the Anglican Church here in the UK. Just for the benefit of listeners who don't, the Anglican Church is definitely the dumbest and dappiest of all the worldwide churches. But there was a debate there
I'm not
about whether or
sure.
not it definitely is, George. You
It's
can't
the
do a
most.
gammon. You
It's the
cannot do
most
a gammon
inoffensive.
defense. You cannot do a gammon defense of the Anglican Church.
I absolutely can. One based on Battenberg and cups of tea. It is a very.
And you're
it
just
is-
proving Phil's point, actually.
Well, it's better. I guess the Catholics have wafers and wine, which is a bit more rock and roll. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just had to defend my national church, which I'm not a member of.
Anyway, so he was he makes this pitch about Russia as the defender of traditional European civilization, I suppose. But it seems to me, partly that's trolling. Trolling. Yeah, so it's trolling Western states. But there is an attempt to kind of appeal to European, particular kind of European conservatives, and the ways in which there was also famously kind of Marine Le Pen, the French national populist leader, had to rely on Russian bank accounts because of the way in which they were kind of boxed in within France itself. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I think the ideological standoff between the claims of socialism, communism on one side and liberal capitalism on the other is a much more important standoff. But there are ideological dimensions as well to the conflict today, if not as pronounced, and they're both layered over similar economic structures. So I suppose the question is how deep the conflict goes.
My take is that they're secondary. I don't want to spend too long on this, but I think that they're
no, fair enough. Yeah,
rather secondary and after the fact, and to a certain extent, even the original imperial competition before 1914 itself was also was infused with values or claims about values, which was also rather superficial.
Yeah, national value. Yeah.
So when you were saying like the different pitches that the different players were making, the way I sort of interpreted this was that each of US, China, Russia, and Europe, particularly France, they have to what's their reason for wanting to be involved in the new scramble in Africa. And for like Europe or France, it's very much like we've been there, we've done that, we have the expertise, the technocratic expertise within kind of colonialism, so leave it to us, we know what to do. With China, it's like, you're going to get a good deal. We're going to give you some infrastructure. You're going to employ some Chinese workers, and you're going to give us some raw material. So actually, like to the neutral observer, if such a thing exists, then China in Africa is, it's just like a fair trade on all sides. For the US,
we're not going to give you we're not going to make you fill out human rights forms and gender compliance forms. All we're going to do is kind of give you money, build you some stadiums and roads, take your diamonds and whatever, and that's it. That's it. There's no kind of NGOs, straightforward. Nothing else comes with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the gender pronouns thing might be a bit inflated in your head, perhaps, as kind of the main driver of kind of the new scramble.
I didn't say gender pronouns. That's the Anglican Church.
Okay.
I mean, the point is, whatever the new kind of thing is that Western NGOs and Western states will kind of force on to, poorer developing countries, like gay rights will be the thing that the American flags now, they'll kind of fly the pride flag. And the Chinese won't do that. They won't put ideological conditions on what they do with their aid. I think that's part of the pitch.
Yeah.
I just wanted to finish my run through. So if you have like China, it's a good deal. Europe or France, like historic links, we know how to do it. The pitch that the US is making is just basically military might. Like, you can do do a deal with us, but ultimately it's due to our military superiority why we have a right to be involved in this scramble. And then Russia, I think, is the least clear. That's why there has to be that kind of ideological defense, because it's not straightforwardly a good material deal, historical links, or military. I know that is like completely oversimplified, but that was my starting point. And that's when you said pitches, that's, that's what
there
I
is.
was
So there is. I think the pitch. I think for the Russian angle is it does. So I don't. I mean, Putin can go on about kind of gender pronouns for the Anglican. The decadence of the Anglican Church. I mean, that's a pitch to Western conservatives. And maybe to a few layers in Russia. I don't think, many Russians particularly care what Western churches are doing. It's not going to kind of make much difference if you're worried about sanctions and inflation and whatnot. But I think in Africa, I think the pitch, it's partly, I think it's probably the appeal of Russia is more as a counterweight to France and America. So that there is at least political and diplomatic space to play off the sides against each other. So it gives you room for maneuver, even if it doesn't have the kind of ideological or material backing as China does now, or as Russia might have had in the Cold War. And the other element, I think, and this I get from some of my colleagues who are Africanists, is just military, right?
Yeah.
In the basic sense that a lot of these African states still have huge kind of, or at least insofar as they do have armories, they're still Soviet era. And so they're still kind of locked into Russian military disbursement, basically. So it's still easier and cheaper to go back to Russia for your guns and ammo than it is to try and kind of start a new security force from scratch with a different country's weaponry.
Hey there, you've reached the end of a short excerpt from an episode that's been released only to our patrons. If you'd like to join us and gain access to around 2 Patreon exclusive episodes a month, please go to patreon.com/bungacast. We'd love to have you.